Hi, this is Ben Rodgerson for MusicRadar.com at Producer Sessions Live 2011. I'm here with Gary Bromham, who's just done his session. So, Gary, how did it go?
Very, very well. Very well. Essentially, I kind of bored everyone with talking about mixing and my experience of talked about my career starting as an engineer at Olympic Studios. I don't know if some of you may remember Olympic, sadly destroyed by the cavalry at EMI Records. And we just talked about my experiences. Basically, I grew up with sort of using analog gear and mixing on an analog desk and translating some of that knowledge into the box. And I kind of used that that little saying, if you like, that mixing in the box involves thinking out of the box, which is not an original thought of mine, but something I kind of probably read online. But I thought it summed up what I was trying to say, which was essentially that when we work in the box, what tends to happen is we tend to overcomplicate things. And for me, my kind of background of having to use tape and that always meant that I had to be organised before I mixed. And one of the things which I really notice when I look at, or when people give me stuff to mix, is how many decisions haven't been made. The analogy I made was the 10 guitar solos, and asking the artist, so which one do you want? And they say, I don't know. What do you think? And I say, I'm not paid to think. I'm just mixing your song. Not literally that, but the idea of just being organised, because mixing is mixing's a creative process, and for me, I like to kind of approach it with if you like, a clear and a fresh mind, and I don't want to be thinking about, do I have to clean up all of these tracks? I mean, there's always an element of having to enhance, but there's a big difference with having to clean everything up before I do it, if you know what I mean.
Obviously, mixing's a very, an in-depth subject. But if you had to give someone, one piece of advice in the best way to approach a mix, what would that be, do you think?
Actually, it's quite simple, really. I mean, one of the basic principles, which seems to have been lost on a lot of people, is the whole principle of mixing is all about balance. So actually balancing things. And just for me, I've noticed that a lot of people, they approach it with the kind of what I call solo mentality, whereby they just get the kick drum right and they get the snare drum right, and they'll make everything individually sound good. And then I'll take the solo buttons out and they'll go, oh my God, it sounds like a mess. It's a big kind of wash of sound. So for me, I always balance a track and try and get a rough balance, and then I'll be microscopic and I'll kind of get in there and say, well, okay, what's wrong with the bass? What's wrong with the vocal? That kind of thing. But for me, the whole principle is balance. So that's the one word I'd use.
Do you think there's something to be said then for mixing as you go, or do you think it's best not to worry too much about the mixing process until you've got, the structure of the track in place?
I tend to mix. I like to see. I view mixing as a very separate process from recording, and certainly from writing. As a songwriter, I always fell into that trap of worrying too much about the pad sound, or worrying too much about whether the overhead sound was. I see them as very different processes, and for me, mixing, I like to step away and then come back to something, and if you like. Treat it with, have fresh ears. I suppose that's what it's all about. Really.
Obviously, as you say, a lot of people do mix in the box now. What are your favourite software tools?
I'm actually using... one of the great things I think about my background is the fact that if you gave me any sort of piece of gear or any door, I'd be quite happy using them all. I mean, I use Logic, but I also tend to use... I'm also being kind of swayed towards... what was Record, which is now part of Reason 6, purely because I look at the desk simulation, and I'm actually quite amazed that no other software company up to this point seems to have recreated what I would see as a conventional mixing desk in software before Propeller Heads have done it. So actually I'm getting kind of swayed towards the Propeller Heads way of working and keeping it sort of relatively uncomplicated. So yeah.
Any favourite plugins that you'd like to recommend?
Well, if I'm using Propeller Heads, then I suppose it would hurt. The new plugins in Reason 6, which I mean Pulverizer, I absolutely love. I mean, just looking outside of reason, maybe if I think of sort of logic, Stephen Slate, there's a Virtual Console collection. Yeah, you can tell I'm a real Luddite, can't you? I'm not picking like the I don't know, the trance gate or all of these. You know, I suppose in that sense I'm searching for plugins that enable me to recreate that kind of analog flavour which I've been used to.
Okay, Gary, thank you very much.
Pleasure.